Ingram Smith, Bud Elliott, back again for another episode of the Nolecast. Bud, going to have a good old conference realignment discussion this evening. So fun. We decided to boot this to kind of its own standalone podcast from the previous pod. So good to have decent amount of time carved out. We can just kind of go back and forth in this, have a little bit of an informal conversation as to what we see, what we've heard, and maybe what we think the next couple of weeks and even couple of years play out. So as always, we'll thank our friends Tarpon Cellars Winery for making conversations like these possible. tarponcellars.com, 20% off when using the coupon code Nolecast. And thank you ever much for the support that you've shown our friend Jeremy, his business, and the Nolecast as a whole with what you guys have done with Tarpon Cellars. So big thank you there. Bud, let's jump into it.
I need a new hat, Jeremy, by the way. I have worn that Tarpon Cellars hat out. It is an awesome hat, and but it's all white, or it was all white. And now I have two young kids, and I wore it all week at the beach and golfing, and I need a new hat. I need a new Tarpon Cellars lid, so Ingram, you got my address.
Yeah, I think
Maggie wants the wine, by the way. We are asking questions. For those of y'all who don't know, so Ingram and his fiance were racking up the wine when my wife was pregnant, right? Because obviously she's not drinking a whole lot of wine when she's pregnant. So now Maggie's like, hey,
she's been like, it's been a couple of weeks.
We got back orders here.
Couple of months.
We're gonna talk to them up there in Atlanta and figure out what's going on. So I keep getting asked.
I don't. We've had a good working relationship for many years, Bud, and that's awesome and something I'm very proud of. But I don't want to see the wrong end of Maggie, and I'll get started on that immediately. Absolutely.
Oh, man. All right. So I do fear that the ACC might be on the wrong end of the Notre Dame stick. That's you didn't think we could pull out a transition out of that, but we did. So I think there's like a couple things we got to establish before we start talking about like the reasonable options. Not that any of these are super reasonable, but they're sort of half-baked and then potentially possible even if they're unlikely. Notre Dame did sign an agreement that if it was going to join a conference in the next X number of years, that it has to play in the ACC unless it decides to buy out of that agreement, which it would have to forfeit all of its basically non-football grant of rights sports. Ultimately, though, that's not that big of a deal to the Irish because those sports don't make a whole lot of money. Thus, most of them are called non-revenue sports. The Irish certainly aren't making any money off their baseball, and their basketball is not bad, but it's not really anything compared to their football. They also are not guaranteed to join any conference, but I do think if they do join one, it will not be the ACC. They really value their independence, and I know that's kind of people just brush that off as a bit of a leverage ploy, but I'm not really so sure, dude. There are some schools that just have so much money in their endowment that it really may not. The TV money is not quite as important to them. It's more path to the playoff and access. And important to remember here, who worked closely together on that 12-team playoff proposal that the ACC voted to veto or at least postpone? The SEC and Notre Dame, right? The SEC has all the incentive in the world to keep Notre Dame independent, and it'll give them a playoff spot because if Notre Dame has an easy path to a playoff spot, it's not going to need to accept a conference bid. It can keep its independence. And it has this new TV deal coming up in, I think, 2 years. So they're about to get paid, and maybe by more than NBC. We'll see. So that's kind of where it is with Notre Dame. I don't think the Irish life raft is coming for the ACC unless some really weird conditions happen. I'm curious if you think like there's any possibility there.
Well, I mean, if you take them at their word, certainly no. Not only is there the comment from a couple months ago about everybody trying to get themselves within the same gravitational pull of either the sun that is the Big Ten or the SEC, to paraphrase their athletic director. Also, when during the COVID year, when Florida State, when ACC gave them that kind of temporary housing, so to say. The Irish came out and said, basically, thanks, we're all the more set in our ways that we're not going to be joining the ACC. I mean, they've given two exceptionally public comments, leading you to not have a whole lot of positive extrapolations as to whether or not they're going to be a conference member. Now, to answer your question, or perhaps reference that you were saying there, look, the only way that I see Notre Dame and the ACC as long-term partners, and this is a something I do not believe is going to happen, but it's the only path that I would think that this
Yeah.
is even a remote possibility, is if the ACC, or excuse me, well, ACC, ESPN, let's use those interchangeably at times. If ESPN decides that potentially owning 2/3 of the college football pie is worth more than just one half. And what I mean by that is, if ESPN were to be convinced that there could be three conference superpowers to exist, and that you would probably overpay for the NBC contract that you just referenced there with Notre Dame, in an effort to try to force them into the ACC full time. That would, in my opinion, see the ACC probably add two schools from Texas, whether a Baylor or SMU or whatever. We've got plenty of time to debate those schools that are probably never going to happen in a far off hypothetical. And then if there were West Coast schools out there that were still of any value, I could see the ACC trying to clobber together some kind of coastal conference with a Texas presence. Again, likelihood of this happen, slim to none. But I think it's the only path that would see Notre Dame and the ACC in some kind of permanent full-time relationship.
I think that makes a lot of sense. And I agree with you. I think it's unlikely. So let's say that the ACC gave everybody a number. Here's a buyout number. Okay. Take it. We will reform. We'll join up with the Big 12. There are still some reasons why that might be an issue. And there were even some rumors that they got a buyout number, right? Like those were kind of floating around a couple of weeks ago, but I don't think any number was ever officially confirmed or settled on. And then we saw Dennis Dodd report 500, and then I think you also saw a number of like 200 out there, and then I saw 50 million, and there's no way that's right.
No,
Common sense.
I think just the buyout itself, and we need to separate the buyout and the grant of rights. But the buyout itself, I believe, is somewhere between 120 and 140 million dollars. Three different kind of ESPN employees have given kind of different numbers in that area, but I'm going to take them at their word that that's probably pretty accurate. Look, bud, you can disagree with me. My opinion on this is that if there was a firm number with absolute clarity, that almost every school would be out of the ACC at this point, because you can borrow against that, you can write a check, whatever. If there were clarity, and there weren't this idea as to what are your media rights, where do they go, even if you come here, does it mean that ESPN is going to be, say you were to go to Big Ten, which I think you're much more likely to go to the SEC at this point, but we can have that conversation in a couple minutes. Say you go to the Big Ten just for this hypothetical, and you're on a Fox property. Does ESPN still own your media rights for the next 13 or 14 years? I mean, that ambiguity is why schools haven't left. If there's if there's a number, people call a private equity firm or our good friend Chad or whoever else, they get a loan, they stretch this out over 20 years.
They issue a bond,
and they're gone. Yeah.
If they're a state school.
Even if it were 500 million and you were to know that it was 500 million, that'd be a hell of a pill to swallow. It'd be really hard, but I think most of these schools would be gone by August 1st.
I would agree with you on that. If there was a straight number that didn't require all those schools to have a landing spot, right? But I don't think there is at this point a straight number that they can borrow against, because if there was, it didn't require 8 schools, and I'm using the number 8 because the ACC's grant of rights, in order to dissolve it, apparently needs more than half, meaning not 7 out of 14, but 8 out of 14. I agree. If there was a real number, I think you're spot on. They would be out, and somebody would probably take them. The issue, though, is I'm not really sure there is a number, but let's say that the schools were taking an alternate route. Maybe legally, they try to find some way to get out of this. Now, this contract's been in place for quite a while, and I don't really think that. My thought is there's probably not a great legal way out of this for a couple of reasons. Number one, they'd probably already have it ready to go in case it was time to do it, and they'd probably already be filed. That it's not tells me that the risk assessment here these schools are running with their attorneys is probably pretty high. A, they're not guaranteed to win on whatever challenge they want to make. B, if they lose, the cost could be extremely prohibitive. And it's also going to take a long time. This is probably not a lawsuit that's going to get solved, within a year. So it's also not a quick fix. And then you're in this very tenuous spot where you're suing your other basically conference mates or suing to get out from those guys. It's just very tough. So I'm not really convinced that there's a real obvious legal solution. I think there's a lot of interesting theories out there. Maybe those will continue to be explored, but I don't see like a real obvious one that's a surefire winner right now. I think if there was, it would have been identified several years ago, probably made public, and then, hey, we can get out of this when the time is right, which would probably be now.
Yeah. There's certainly
I would
been
guess.
a want to get out of this conference by multiple institutions for a while. I'm very disappointed myself because the phrase just slipped my mind. Is it sovereign immunity or
Yeah.
what's the okay? I've talked to a couple pretty accomplished lawyers, and they attribute that as not much more than message board talk. I mean, I know that that's been thrown around in the past couple months that these public institutions can kind of claim something that basically is not within their financial best interest. And I'm not a lawyer. I'm
Yeah.
not trying to speak like a lawyer. But most attorneys that I've talked to that are familiar with this don't put a whole lot of credence into that being a successful route that you're going to be able to challenge this grant of rights.
Yeah, that is more commonly used in a tort. Okay. So like the state messes somebody up, you sue them, it's capped, you need to go to the legislature to get more money. It's not really for contract law in most situations. So I agree with you. That is just message board stuff. You maybe could argue that on a contract of this size, that a state institution or like one person being a university president didn't actually have the authority to enter into that agreement, and that maybe that like something of that magnitude and that duration needs to be approved by a state legislature. I don't know. I mean, that's maybe something you could just, if you're throwing stuff against the wall, you got what, Florida, North Carolina, Virginia, what other state school or like states rather, not state schools. Pitt is Pitt private?
Clemson, South
Clemson,
Carolina.
right? South Carolina. So maybe like you find something there, but still, like that could vary state to state. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Yeah.
But then again, like then you could be like, yeah, guess what? The deal's voided potentially. That's a real tough road to hoe. I think the most likely option, which is still unlikely, of the ACC dissolving soon, is if you find 8 schools that want to break the grant of rights. The problem is, in order to want to break the grant of rights, you need to have something better lined up, and probably significantly better in order to leave, because you're not going to leave the ACC if you're one of these middling schools to go to the Big 12 for $1 million more a year. You're going to be traveling all over hell's half acre. Like, can you imagine if you are Boston College and you're like, yeah, we're going to join the Big 12. Okay. Imagine flying from Chestnut Hill to Waco to Lubbock to Manhattan, Kansas to Lawrence. It's not a great situation for those guys. But that's on the bottom end. We'll get to that in a minute. Among the top schools, I know you were sketching this out earlier with tiers, who do you see as properties that are almost certainly wanted, most likely by at least one of the big two, if not both?
So I think the ACC has. I broke this down: tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4. I think the ACC has 5 tier 1 properties: Clemson, Miami, Florida State, UVA, UNC.
Okay.
We'll explain that because some of y'all may question some of those selections. Tier 2, and we'll come back to all this. Tier 2, in my opinion, NC State, Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, Duke, Louisville, Pitt. Some of that is eye of the beholder, but my opinion. Tier 3, Boston College. Tier 4, Wake and Syracuse. I think if you're going to get to 8, in my opinion, Bud, the SEC would need to feel comfortable taking like NC State and Virginia Tech.
Right.
And then you'd have to have a large enough grab from the Big Ten as to UVA, UNC, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Georgia Tech, Miami, whatever, and then or Clemson, and then you'd have a couple properties make its way into the SEC. But you need if UNC and UVA are moving to the SEC per se, then I don't see any world that you could even think of getting to 8. I don't know that you could get to 6
Right.
if
So
that happens.
let's explain that. So the Big Ten wants to take schools that are in the AAU. That is kind of a stated thing. A lot of their presidents have said that over the years. Who knows if that stays going forward as a rule? Because Nebraska was in it when they were in the process of getting the Big Ten. They dropped out because they went down a little bit as a school. But I do think that's still probably at the bare minimum a preference of those of the Big Ten. Virginia Tech, I don't think is an AAU member, right? Like that's
Right.
not,
Yeah.
No. And I'm not trying to crap on Bob Tech. I mean, I got an FSU degree, and they're not an AAU member, and they're not close. NC State is not an AAU member. I agree with you. Like there's certain dominoes that have to fall. If you're the SEC, you probably just try to go grab, Virginia and North Carolina for sure, because then that cuts off the Big Ten from like double expanding unless they want to really sacrifice some of their academic stuff. Virginia is valuable, as is North Carolina, to both because neither conference is in those states right now. And to reference a tweet by Cole Kublik, I think we talked about 2 or 3 episodes ago, he said the Big Ten network was drawing 10 cents per cable box in the Los Angeles market. With the addition of USC and UCLA, it is drawing $1.50 per cable box per month in the Los Angeles market. That is huge. Now, if you add UVA, if you add UNC, I mean, Charlotte and obviously, DC are, and like, I don't understand Charlottesville is not technically full DC market, but you get the point. That would be a lot of money for those schools that are already in Big Ten networks everywhere, SEC networks everywhere. Hell, ACC network is everywhere. It's just not as popular. Those are why they're obvious targets. I think that Florida State and Miami, probably one, maybe both, would be attractive to the Big Ten in terms of expanding markets and expanding reach of the Big Ten network. And you would really make the Big Ten a full coastal conference. I mean, USC and Miami is about as far apart as you can get, unless you want to add, like University of Alaska or Washington or something like that. But man, I agree with you. Like there's a path. There's a path to like 6 promotion, and then 2. Okay, so like you're fully correct. I think about you would need the right schools to go to the right leagues for this to work in the short term. But even so, I don't think you get much past 6. I think the other 2 would have to come basically from schools saying, well, hey, this is not really tenable long term staying in the ACC. We're going to jump to the Big Ten. To the Big 12, or some combination of the Big 12 and whomever. Maybe that is Pitt and NC State or something like that. Maybe that is how you, in theory here, of course, could get 8. But it is, it's somewhat concerning that you're having to like look on both ends. So like schools that are getting promoted, moving up, and then also like some schools that are life rafting this thing.
Pitt and Louisville to the Big 12
Louisville,
would be a good landing place for them. I mean, they would have West Virginia over there. They'd be able to have a little bit of a geographic rivalry. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think you need the SEC to see value in getting into North Carolina and Virginia, and not the flagship universities of the state. And you would need Georgia Tech to go to the Big, and then some. Florida State, Clemson, and Miami are the 3 schools in the conference that I could see going to either. UVA, UNC could be desired by either. I think there's a better cultural fit in the Big Ten for them, but
for sure,
money trumps culture at times, certainly. But we'll just have to see. I will say that there was a decent amount of kind of quiet optimism a couple weeks ago that maybe there might be something sooner on the horizon than later. Haven't heard a whole lot of that over the last 7 or 8 days, but I don't. This is pure conjecture. There's sometimes where I tell you like, "Hey, I'm not sure about this." Wink, wink, nod, nod. This is not. This is me just guessing. I wonder if there was not an opinion 2 weeks ago or so that you might have eight. You might have eight landing spots for different people, not eight that want to leave. I think you got a full conference that want to leave, other than, probably Wake, Cuse, and and BC. Um, I just don't think you have eight chairs available right now to try to find people an ultimate landing place and try to get to the number to where you could, obviously have the cleanest break is if you can reach some kind of majority that decide to push the nuclear button on this thing. But until then, we're all just kind of here pending. That's our conference status right now. It's just pending, hoping that we're not pending for the next 10 years and that there's some kind of break from this purgatory and we can have some kind of, clarity as to what the future looks like and maybe more importantly, what the future paycheck's going to look like.
I agree with you on that. I want to point out something, by the way, and people are like, well, why would they not take this? Like that's a good team. That would make the league better. And indeed, that is a consideration. Okay. But the common belief out there is that they are not going to take a team unless it makes all the other teams more money than they are currently making. And so the logic on that basically is, for the SEC or the Big Ten, you're cutting the pie in 17 instead of 16. So you need to add enough revenue to where you're basically in the top half of revenue producers, and maybe by a good bit, right? Because certain teams are going to account for like a lot more than just one full share in terms of revenue generated. I'm not sure very many of these teams that we talked about tonight do that, but I also don't know that we're talking about the same pie. I think that there's a long game element here that I know you brought up in our pre-show talk. I think we'd agree not a lot of these teams are going to make the SEC or the Big Ten more money as currently comprised with the current deal, but I think that's too short-sighted to think about.
It is. I would argue, there's 4 different states, Virginia, North Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, that would make the Big Ten's contract a hell of a lot more appealing. So there's 4 though. There's 4 places there, and then you can decide whether or not Clemson adds to the pie. Look, I'll tell you, y'all, the conversation as to whether each individual school adds to the pie is a very small one. There's not many of them. You really need this to more be college football apocalypse and having people with the idea of like, hey, this is our final swoop. We're building the conference for the next 40 years, or we're building the current football playoff model that we're going to go to for the next 30 or 40 years, and not necessarily expect to see revenue producing entities in year 2 or 3 or something like that, because there's just not that many out there that by themselves organically grow the pie that has to be divided. So if that's the scale that everybody's getting put on, then we're going to be in purgatory for a while. You really need, some kind of final grab to where there's a little bit of flexibility and people are more spending with the idea as to what this looks like in 10, 20, or 30 years.
Right. Maybe the ability to host in league playoff before you send a team out to the ultimate playoff. I think that's, yeah, man, like you have to assume that there are other revenue streams that they're focused on. You also have to think about where the votes come from. Would Florida vote to put FSU in the SEC? I doubt it. I'm sure A&M didn't want Texas in. Now, Texas is a bigger brand than Florida State is in the grand scheme of things. So the idea that, hey, like Florida doesn't want FSU in the SEC doesn't mean anything because A&M didn't want Texas in the SEC. I think that's faulty because Texas A&M is not a major brand compared to Texas right now. Now, maybe if they keep spending like they are, possibly, but that's still going to take a hell of a long time.
Yeah, there's 2 or 3 brands in college athletics that are as large as Texas. I wouldn't compare. I wouldn't
academically. They're also really good.
Yeah, really good, great,
and
an
obvious fit for the Big Ten.
Yep. And I know we're talking about college football teams, right? But trust me, these graduate school programs matter to a lot of these people that are in conversations, whether they be college presidents, whether they be TV networks. One reason UVA is as appealing an entity as it is, it has legitimately a world-class business school and law school attached to it. It has, some of the more influential people in the country tend to come out of there. And it's also the school that is kind of the power base, which Washington, D.C. draws from. There's some, different schools have different appeals.
Yeah.
But Texas is not a brand to which I'd make a whole lot of comparisons to any other school in the country about. So let's talk real quickly about uneven revenue sharing. I don't see this. I said to Bud in our pre-show, like the second you start to do this, I really think you're just strapping yourselves with dynamite as far as the longevity of your conference. Now, maybe there's some kind of Machiavellian appeal to that if you're Florida State or another school in the
Good
ACC,
word, by
which
the way.
that you want to just bring this thing to an end. So yeah, let's have that conversation start, and then let's have each other, all of us arguing with each other in 2 years about who got what and why, and why Wake Forest doesn't get as much money as one school, but Wake Forest beat this school in football, whatever. The arguments are ridiculous. The case studies aren't massive, but history would show us that this brings about the end of your conference quicker than it offers you some kind of sustaining lifeline. I'm curious to see it, Bud, because I don't think it's a great thing, but maybe there's some kind of ancillary angle that some of these schools would have in the back of their minds.
So counterpoint, USC asked for this, did not get it, and bolted. Now, I think USC would have bolted even if they did get it, because, it's kind of common sense, right? Like the Big Ten is just that much better than the Pac-12 as far as money. Are there some schools in this league that would accept like a 60% share of what they've been making, as opposed to having to drop down? Like, are there any schools that you can think of that, if they only had two options, and I don't think they do, I think the third option is to say, hey, pound sand, we'll take our full share, we'll take our money, we'll make this as hard as humanly possible, and we'll go figure out what we're going to do in 13 years from now. No, I don't think that's going to happen. I think they'll figure out something long before then. But are there any schools that, in theory, if the choice is take this or perhaps the conference splits up much earlier, that they would not make at least 60% of what they're making now if they had to go elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, if Wake Forest doesn't want to play, Hampton
Right.
Sydney and Washington and Lee, then yeah, that's probably what they need to do. At the same time, if I'm Wake Forest, what you just alluded to there, and I know that I've only got 13 years worth of big time college athletic checks coming to my name, hell no, I'm not doing it. I want my money. I want my money
Yeah.
for as long as I'm in this conference.
And then you'll figure it out later.
Yeah, and I mean,
Yeah.
if how much more money am I going to make if I take 5 years of unequal revenue sharing than if I take 8 and I'm kicking off 40% back into the broader pool? The other problem with this is that there's not really enough money in the pool to take from Wake, Syracuse, BC, whoever you want it to be, and
Right.
then give to other schools. It's just not that, if Wake Forest, just for clear round numbers, let's say Wake's going to get a $30 million check, and instead they take a 55% or whatever, so they get 16 million. Okay, so you got $14 million back in the pool, and say you're going to pay that to Miami, Clemson, Florida State, UNC, whatever it may be. So you're going to give those schools $3.25 million or 3.3, repeating whatever it is. That's not going to change the general dynamics of this. And also, and I'm not arguing with you because I interpret you thinking that this is a great idea or something like that. But if everybody is under the idea that this conference has a very limited amount of days and we're just playing out the stack, then even if you get $3 million more a year, hell, even if you get $10 million more a year, everybody's still trying to figure out a way to get to the Big Ten or the SEC. So I just don't think that this is some kind of lifeboat of any kind other than maybe, placating some small amount of placation of your larger brands.
Here's something for you. And this is not on our sheet. Something kind of crazy I thought of. ESPN is probably not going to own much of the Big Ten. right? ESPN's going to own 100% of the SEC. It still has a pretty good interest in developing the ACC, and I think they are potentially looking into adding teams if they can, if it makes sense. That's probably not what FSU fans want to hear because they want out, and I
Yeah,
don't blame them.
nor does it impact the grant of rights, which I've heard thrown around. That's
Correct.
not. There's not some legal out if you get them to add. All it
That
means is that it makes the number, if they go past 16, it makes the number all the higher to get out of this thing. So just want to throw that out there.
I agree. What if you could somehow negotiate with ESPN something where like you get X more dollars per year now, but if you leave for another conference that's not the SEC, you have to give it back. Almost sort of like almost a reverse grant of rights. That way, ESPN can protect certain brands in the conference that it already basically owns.
The ESPN reverse mortgage.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, right, yeah, like almost like the ESPN reserve clause. Okay, like yeah, like we understand we need to float you a little more money to make sure you're still trying to compete at the highest level. We may call you up to this league whenever. This is totally out of left field. Like this might be really half baked. It's not a great idea to like workshop ideas literally live. I don't know. I just wonder if you're ESPN, why would you leave it to chance that the Big Ten might get some of those schools?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that speaks to how strong ESPN feels this contract is.
Yeah,
that they have not done so.
I think you're absolutely right about that, and let's return to that shortly. But the one thing you don't want to leave the chance is working with the best team in the game when it comes to getting a mortgage. We've been so fortunate to work with the OGs of the lending sponsors with Chad and Shannon. They are the legendary team. They've been fantastic for approaching 450 listeners of ours, which is just a mind-boggling number. Bud included in that number, 844 FSU loan, 844 FSU loan. Shannon is as good a guy as you could ever work with, as professional and responsive as anyone that I've encountered in my professional life. It's a market that's changing, not by the day, but changing by the week. And certainly there's been some nuance involved in the changing rates. Work with the best team possible. And Bud and I wholeheartedly assure you that is the team, the legendary team of Chad and Shannon.
No doubt about it. I've used them twice. Certainly would recommend using them again. 844 FSU loan is the number to call. That is 844 FSU loan. What in the world is going on with my lighting? It's like slowly getting darker throughout the episode. I don't know. This is annoying me to the point where I need to try to figure out. Like, also, it's turned to blue, so I'm not really sure why we're on. I mean, that's terrible too. That's even worse. Okay. Well, my lighting broke. Oh no! Now green.
There you go.
All right. Apparently the green button works, guys. I've got a little
Nice.
remote here for the
Got an ocean green behind you there.
Yeah. Okay.
One thing that I think is
Radioactive.
interesting. Yeah. Yes. Just as being in this conference is.
Oh gosh.
So I'm curious, if you're the ACC and you've got this contract that, as we were just talking about, they think is, by all accounts, written by some good lawyers. This is not something that anybody's
Signed
found
by some dummies.
a whole lot of holes to poke in. So if you're ESPN, this is an uncomfortable conversation for Florida State fans and anybody in the ACC. But what's the value of a fantastic contract when weighed against watching some of the properties that you own in that contract kind of wither and die on the vine? Is it worth you playing out this brilliant contract for the next 14 years if Clemson, Miami, Florida State, and anybody else of football value more or less just kind of withers away? I think, it's not there yet. Obviously, there's a large revenue disparity, and we're only heading in two different directions. But I think by 2026, Bud, there's going to be a pretty clear delineation as to whether or not you're playing JV football or SEC Big Ten football. And I think perception among high school prospects is there to an extent, but I only think it's going to be more defined. I only think it's going to be a bigger deal in time. If you're Florida State, Clemson, Miami, anybody else that wants to play big time college football, can you survive playing minor league college football for 8 years, for 6 years? I don't know. I don't know what happens here or what it looks like, but I think we're going to get a pretty good idea as to what ESPN kind of values, what they think the long-term prospectus of the sport is, or whether or not they're just going to ride out one hell of a contract that John Swafford gave them and roll this thing into 2036.
I think it's certainly possible that they could decide to just ride that thing out. I mean, they have shareholders that they're beholden to, right? And like they're in seemingly no rush to have that happen, like to have that get away from them now, because like they're making a pretty good amount of money on it. But here's the thing: like you're going to get the football only facility built. I don't know what other adaptations are coming to college football that are like major Death Star type projects that you're going to miss out on building. Like you may go through if this were not to go well, you may go through a low period, but like once you get out, what is the worry that like too much damage has been done to your brand? Is the worry like that your fans check out and don't come back once you get that infusion of cash in a new league? Is the worry that like maybe the value you bring to a new league isn't there, so you don't get invited at that point? I mean, Miami basically took 15 years off from college football, and their fans seem to be back, right? Like that's I'm only kind of half joking here.
Yeah.
So I think you'd have to be down for longer than that. Not that would be fun if it were to happen, and I think you'll get out of this league earlier than 8 years. I really don't think you're going to stay in the ACC, in 2030. I'm just not convinced that it happens like in like the next year, But if you're the ESPN, it's an interesting question. Like, it's not so much that ESPN cares about those teams; it's more protectionism for its big investment that is the SEC and playing keep away. Why did the Big Ten take those two schools out west? Was it really ready to expand to the West Coast? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I already said the cable box thing, which certainly makes a lot of sense, but it's also playing keep away. If the SEC, which traditionally has been very much about drivable games for its fans, not having to fly everywhere, that like part of the whole thing is you're seeing all your guys you work with at the water cooler and you're talking smack to them. If they're willing to say, yeah, Florida and Austin, Texas, and Columbia, Missouri are in the same league, well, then that whole geography thing is basically out the door for the SEC. And for the Big Ten, it might as well be as well. I think it was much as a keep away move, same as ESPN, I think, and certainly the SEC and Notre Dame were working together. Notre Dame got what it want by having that not automatic, but damn near automatic playoff spot in the 12 thing, the 12 team post playoff. And they played keep away from the Big Ten. When does Notre Dame go to a conference? It's probably when they don't have a reasonable path to the playoff. So that same logic could apply. Are you able to keep a Virginia, North Carolina, Florida State, Clemson away from the Big Ten? Although Clemson in the Big Ten, I have a hard time seeing, but still. Does that make sense? I guess I don't want to make it seem. I know a couple episodes ago, I think I didn't do a good enough job explaining. It's not so much that ESPN cares about its investment in those teams. It already has a good profitable investment now. But the ACC, ESPN could choose to view it as a bit of a farm system for its major investment and sort of try to shepherd those better properties along as they build those, quote unquote, super conferences. Because I'm still very steadfast in the idea we're not stopping at 32. I know what Matt Hayes' report said. The very upper division of college football is not going to be 32 teams. I think it's probably 50 or 60 in the long term. You're still going to need some teams to take some losses. Like if you are, I don't know, like let's pick a school here. Give me a school that normally wins more games than it loses, occasionally plays for a conference title game.
Auburn.
Auburn's probably pretty good. Now, they do have some real ups. I mean, they've played for and won a national title in the last 10 to 12 years. But if you're Auburn and all of a sudden you're adding Florida State, Miami, and Clemson to the SEC. You recruit all those areas pretty hard. That's going to push you down a little bit. Are you cool with going 5-7 often? Because you're not going to play a whole lot of non-conference games once we break off as big tier D1. Like maybe you play one quote unquote lower division game. Are you cool with like a good year being 8-4? I don't know. That's why I think we're going to have more teams than people realize in this thing. And maybe you have some unequal revenue sharing among those teams just to get in, because some teams are going to say yes. Maybe like a Duke, which is crazy as it sounds. Maybe they get in, they agree to just take those beatings in football so they continue to have a lot of money to play basketball at a real high level. Vanderbilt, who obviously I root for really hard now because, Barton's there. They basically get a paycheck to get their butts whipped in football, and they spend a lot of that on being really great in baseball, and sometimes okay in basketball. Not usually, but sometimes. So I don't know, man. Like I don't want to make it sound like they're invested in these teams. I think they're invested in not letting these teams go to another league. But you could also make the counter argument, well, hey, one way to not let the other league take them is just let them die on the vine.
Yep. Yeah. I don't think these schools are here for the long term. I don't think that's going to be in play, but it is, something that I think will be made all the more clear in 2025, 2026 moving forward. And each year you're not in one of those conferences from that year moving forward. I don't, it's 2 to 3 years won't kill you, but I don't think you want to flirt with a whole lot of otherwise. And to answer your question, what are some of the bad things that could come from that? Hey, look, I've said this since the beginning of NIL. Yes, it's going to matter if you give your quarterback $3 million or $9 million or whatever. But what is going to be equally important is the ability to put these guys on some type of salary and say everybody that's on the roster is getting 35, 55, whatever. I know you can't officially do that with television money, at least right now. I think that will get washed enough times in the future to where you'll start to see that bleed into NIL and where it's going to matter. So I think if you're not in the right place, you're going to look at having a collective salary of $20,000 and somebody down the road is going to have 85,000. And I don't care what the roster, I don't care what the recruiting relationship is, whatever else, you're just not going to win that. You might win that 1 out of 30 times. It's just going to be truly you're playing AAA baseball and other schools are playing in the majors.
I agree with you on that. It makes a lot of sense, unfortunately, but I don't know, man, I still have a lot of hope here. Like, I'm not just trying to like sell hope so people keep listening to a podcast. I do think that ultimately this works out for them.
Yeah, I'm just talking about what happens if you don't. And yeah. I don't, again, I think there's movement here. I was more optimistic about it 2 weeks ago than I am right now, but I still think when you talk to other people, look, when you talk to people at Clemson, they're all but packing up the car, ready to get the hell out of this conference and celebrate doing it. I mean, they're gung ho. UNC is not being shy about letting some of their power brokers know that they're evaluating every option. Same with UVA. Everybody wants to leave. And whenever you have a situation like that, you're basically just sitting on a time bomb. It could happen in 2 weeks, could happen in 2 years. We'll just have to see if whatever ingredients to the recipe that's necessary for this large break-off to occur. But in the time being, I think everybody's just kind of sitting here looking at each other, knowing that, their ultimate future is in another conference. So,
yeah, for sure. By the way, Luke Kromenhoek, the quarterback that FSU has committed, had to set the kid straight, man, on Twitter. Nice dude, like talking to him, but he thinks that the single best quarterback season ever is Joey Burrow. I was like, nah, man, it's unquestionably Cam Newton. I mean, nobody else on that offense ever took a snap in the NFL.
Didn't know that. That's
And
all the more
he
impressive.
He looked like a dad dunking on 8-year-olds in pool basketball consistently against guys who were future first rounders on
in
defense.
the
Yeah,
SEC.
yeah.
Old Cam, money well spent there.
But then again, I'm not really sure Luke was born when when was Cam? When was the Cam back? Was that 2010?
Yes.
Yeah, so he was like 5. Okay.
Setting him straight.
I did. Yeah, I let him know. Yeah. He liked the reply. Okay.
All right. Well, one thing that we're sure that you'd like is partnering with our good friends over at Congruity. Certainly been something that we've more than liked over the years. Matt Lewis, fantastic individual. Spend 10 minutes with him. 5 of it talking about Florida State ball, 5 talking about how he can help with your business. Talked to a listener named Patrick earlier this week, trying to put him and Matt together. So whether it be payroll, HR, anything that your business may have a little bit of a hole in its coverage, or you want to have a simpler, more efficient way of doing that, Matt Lewis is fantastic. Congruity is a great company, one that we're proud to partner with. CongruityHR.com is the website. And as always, feel free to reach out to me if you would prefer for a third-party introduction, as old Mr. Patrick did.
You know, what'd be really cool is if Matt Lewis could do like not only HR and payroll management, but bedtime management, right? Just like consistency of bedtime. That would be nice. That would be. Sorry,
He'll zoom in with your children for 10 minutes, put them to
you know,
sleep.
did you notice everybody gave you credit for that tweet the other night?
Yes, I did. I did. It's all right. Just leave it alone.
Yeah.
Leave it alone.
Did we talk about the Chris Parson decommitment?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess we need to real quickly.
I like the kid. As Travis Branham, our basketball analyst, 24/7 Sports, said today, a lot of times it's not just the kid making the decision. A lot of times you got to recruit other people around the kid, parents, trainers, whomever. And a lot of times they make the decision. And I think his dad, with his recent comments, was pretty obvious that he values his son a whole lot. And, you got to make sure your valuation of yourself is matched up to the whatever valuation is actually there. And I mean, look, FSU wanted to take 2 quarterbacks. I think they like Brock Glenn more than Parson. Maybe not a ton more, but I think they like him more. And they weren't going to not pursue him and take him just to keep Chris Parson in the fold. And speaking of Chromahoke, I think Chromahoke's a better prospect than Parson is. So if you're him, you also got to consider, okay, do they like the other 23 they're bringing in more than me? And the 24 just outplayed me at FSU Elite Camp, despite the fact he's only played like 1 year of quarterback. So when am I going to start here? It's kind of my take on it. But yeah. I do like talking to the kid, like especially when he's not surrounded by everybody else.
Yep. Best of luck to him. Hope he finds a landing place, whether that be Mississippi State, or if I'm him, I'd love to see how serious SMU is about NIL, and let's see what some of that oil money wants to do to get a prospect that otherwise would have been playing in the Power 5. But good luck to Chris, and we'll monitor from afar. But looks like we got the clarity that we talked about in last week's episode. We had a feeling that was going to come one way or another.
No doubt about it. What else we got tonight? Anything?
So,
48 minutes.
As we depart and in this, this is a little bit out of whack, but I do want to have us leave with the idea that maybe it's not in all these schools' best interest to play football. I mean, we talked about Wake Forest and we joked about them playing my alma mater and stuff like that. That's about the size of the school they are. I don't want to like be conspiratorial, but I know that you mentioned this to me, so I'm not trying to steal your point. I find it very interesting that Pat Forte has kind of thrown out the idea that Stanford may not be playing college football for forever and forever. Amen. I would be fascinated as to if this process that we're about to watch plays out also includes some of these academic institutions just being like, you know what? Thanks, no thanks. I don't think we're going to be part of this. And if such a school as Stanford's considering doing that, that's pretty wild. I mean, they're not a football power, but that's a pretty good football school historically, and it certainly had its high water moments.
It makes a lot of sense to me that they might consider not doing that. So what if Cal joins them? What if you get a league of? I don't think anybody would actually leave the Big Ten or the SEC, right? If you did in the Big Ten, it would probably be Northwestern, I would guess. But there may be enough schools out there that decide we're good. We're not really trying to play semi-professional college football for ongoing and actually have players as employees and whatnot. I mentioned what if Duke is attractive because they'll take the football, they'll take the whole check, they'll take the football losses. It's basically a bye week for a breather for everybody, and they'll give you that quality basketball, assuming that they're still good after Coach K hangs it up, which recruiting wise, they seem to be doing pretty well.
I was going to say recruiting would suggest that they're not going anywhere. They know how to leverage the NIL when it comes to that. Absolutely.
So that's certainly a possibility. But like Boston College, could Boston College join that Stanford role if Stanford were to not play football anymore? And I'm not really sure that. Like, I think 40 is just floating it because on their podcast because his daughter, I think her name was Brooke, was a really good swimmer there and was at the Olympic trial. So he obviously knows a lot of people within the athletic department at Stanford.
It's impressive. Yeah, good for him. I didn't know that. That's it's ridiculous to look at the amount of Olympians and stuff that school's. It's not breaking
nuts.
news to say that that's one of the best athletic departments in the country. I mean, it routinely wins the Sears Award or whatever it's called now. As
The
far
Directors Cup, right?
Directors Cup, yeah. Whoever the title sponsor.
Clemson's Directors Cup looks like an actual measuring cup. They're like, oh, we have one sport.
Yes, we do, and 42% of our revenue goes into it. If you don't believe us, I guess Syracuse could be another school in this conversation.
Sure,
but
I could see that. Like Pitt, I think still wants to play football.
They do. I think Pitt in the right person's eyes is kind of an attractive property. We'll see. They're obviously not.
How good are they academically? Like I'll admit of being a little bit ignorant of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that either. Let me look real quickly here. And obviously, Western Pennsylvania is not the hotbed of talent that it once was, but it still has its pull. And the state of Pennsylvania is one of the more populated states in the country. It doesn't look like it's looks like it's not necessarily a value add or a black eye either. It's kind of a fairly average academic institution.
Yeah. All right. I don't know, man. It's just be very interesting to see it play out. Do you think we have all quiet the rest of the summer? Are we going to jinx this? Can we jinx it into existence?
I think if you get past August 5th or so, that not much more is going to happen. Maybe August 10th or something like that. I mean, I think there's a period of time where there may be a little bit of movement. 2 weeks ago, I would have told you that maybe there was more likely to see something happen this summer. I just don't see where that's coming from, y'all, to be perfectly honest with you. And things can change. And conference realignment is unlike any subject matter that there is out there. But when I lean on the network of contacts that I have and talk with Bud as well, I just don't see the avenue for immediate movement on this. We'll see if that changes.
I agree with you on that. I think ESPN probably tries to milk a couple more profitable years out of the ACC, and then we see what happens.
Yeah,
we'll see how wrong we are.
Here's to being wrong on this one. Just get us the out of this conference. But till then, we'll be talking about the wonderful ACC, and I know you're headed up to ACC Media Days, so interested in hearing on that, and we'll certainly lean on your experience. Not something that I'm going to do this year, but it does have a little bit of the 2012 meetings that you and I and everybody were at, and that is kind of the gold standard of ACC meetings. So maybe you'll see that again.
Got the orange overalls crew.
Oh yeah, that was
a good ACC meetings. The Jameis one, for as crazy as that was a good one. LaMarcus Joyner what did he say? Oh, good luck with that, Clemson. That was
That was a great quote. Yeah.
yeah. I forgot the question asked him was something ridiculous. It was like he goes, the guy asked him something like, "Is Taj Boyd just living the life?" Or something. It was something just ridiculous.
Right.
I was like, "You remember this?"
I do remember it.
We were
Yeah,
sitting there. I
and
was
it
like,
was purple and orange polo
to an
and
FSU player, right?
Yeah, that was some of the Clemson media is a different dynamic in general. They don't have like a singular dominant power as far as like a website or whatever.
That
So they've
family
got
tree goes up and down.
yeah, they've got ton and it is some of it is some of it, obviously there's not a whole lot of big, capital J journalism anymore at all, particularly in some of these fan sites, but there's a period of time where Clemson was just something else. Funny.
Hey man, Dabo is right. Takes him out, plays a golf tournament with all the media before the year. Like they're
yeah. Dabo's done well.
Nobody gets in trouble at Clemson. That's part. Like they do a really good job.
Mm-hmm. Little old Clemson. Yep.
All
right, brother man. Another good Nolecast in the books. Certainly appreciate y'all listening. If you're still here with us 55 minutes into it, that's even all the more appreciated. If you want to just let us know on Twitter with some kind of crazy code word, we haven't done that in a while. We'll just say, I don't know what it is, but I'll put you on the spot. But otherwise, thank you for your listenership. If you give us a chance to give us 5 stars on iTunes or any other podcast device, know that it is greatly appreciated.
All right, buddy. See you later, man.